Picture this. The gentle patter of rain lulls you to sleep, but when you open your eyes, the world is no longer the same. Shadows stretch longer, whispers crawl closer, and the familiar feels wrong. Welcome to next video, where the veil between the ordinary and the unknown dissolves, revealing tales that will stay with you long after the night ends. Tonight, we'll lead you through stories of fear, each one darker, each one colder than the last. But before we begin, we have a question. Where are you listening from? Be careful. Your answer might just inspire the next chapter of our darkness. The House with Hidden Eyes. The countryside cottage stood nestled in a secluded valley, surrounded by swaying fields of wheat and bordered by a dense forest. For Emma and Jack, it was supposed to be a sanctuary, a retreat to repair their frayed connection. Life in the city had left them exhausted, yearning for simplicity and quiet. When they arrived, the house greeted them with an eerie silence. It was charming at first glance, a quaint, old-fashioned structure with ivy creeping along its stone walls. But there was an undeniable sense of age, as though the house carried secrets older than its worn wooden beams. Emma hesitated at the door, gripping Jack's hand. "It feels heavy," she murmured. Jack chuckled. "That's just the fresh air, city girl. Give it a day, and you'll love it here." She forced a smile, but the unsettling weight in her chest refused to lift. The first evening passed uneventfully. As they unpacked and explored the house, they found peculiar touches. A rocking chair in the corner that seemed to sway on its own. Wallpaper faded into strange, swirling patterns, and an attic door that creaked ominously when opened. While Jack was outside gathering firewood, Emma decided to investigate the attic. Dust motes floated in the air as she climbed the narrow staircase. The attic smelled of mildew and age. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, and cobwebs adorned the low ceiling like ghostly veils. She found the photographs tucked into an old leather-bound album, their edges yellowed and curling. Flipping through them, she noticed smiling faces of what seemed to be the house's previous tenants. But each photo had a detail that sent a chill racing down her spine. A shadowy figure lurking in the background, its form indistinct but undeniably present. When Jack returned, Emma showed him the photographs. He brushed it off. "Old photos can be weird," he said. "Maybe it's a trick of the light." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were watching her. The following days brought strange occurrences. At first, it was subtle footsteps echoing in the hallway when no one was there, doors creaking open on their own. Jack dismissed it as the quirks of an old house settling, but Emma began waking up in the middle of the night, certain she had heard someone whispering her name. One evening, Jack ventured into the basement to check on the water heater. When he returned, his face was pale. "There's something weird down there," he admitted. He described finding scratch marks on the concrete walls, as if something with claws had tried to dig its way out. But when Emma asked to see, the basement door wouldn't budge, as though the house itself had locked it away. That night, they heard laughter, distant, muffled, and unnatural. It seemed to echo through the walls, growing louder as they lay frozen in bed. The turning point came when they discovered an old camera on a shelf in the study. It was a vintage Polaroid, dusty but intact, with a roll of film already loaded. Jack was curious. "What do you think is on this?" "Maybe more photos of the tenants," Emma replied. though her voice quivered. They decided to develop the film, setting up a makeshift darkroom in the bathroom. When the first image emerged, Emma's breath caught. It was a picture of their bedroom, taken from the corner of the ceiling. "That's impossible," Jack stammered. The second image was worse. It showed Emma and Jack asleep in bed. Their faces were peaceful, but in the corner of the room, the shadowy figure stood watching. Emma screamed, dropping the photo. Jack grabbed her hand, urging her to stay calm, but his voice trembled. The final photograph was the most chilling. It depicted their bedroom door slightly ajar. The shadow loomed outside, its form sharper, more defined. A gaunt, faceless figure reaching for the handle. The atmosphere in the house shifted after that night. Shadows seemed to move on their own, stretching and twisting across the walls. The laughter turned into sobs, echoing through the house in a mournful cacophony. Jack grew irritable, snapping at Emma over trivial matters. His once rational demeanor crumbled as he began hearing voices, soft, insistent whispers calling his name. Emma found herself drawn back to the attic, where the photographs now lay scattered across the floor. New images had appeared in the album, photos of her and Jack, taken from impossible angles. One showed Emma sitting in the rocking chair in the living room, though she had no memory of ever doing so. The rocking chair began to move at night, its rhythmic creak filling the silence. The final night was a crescendo of terror. Emma woke to find Jack missing. She searched the house, calling his name, but the only response was the eerie creak of the rocking chair. In the living room, she found him sitting there, his eyes wide and unblinking. He clutched the camera in his hands, muttering incoherently. "Jack, what's wrong?" Emma pleaded, shaking him. He turned to her, his voice a hollow whisper. "It's not just watching us, it's waiting." The lights flickered, plunging the house into darkness. Emma felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder and screamed. Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the front door, but it wouldn't open. The shadows closed in around them, writhing and forming grotesque shapes. The sobbing turned into guttural laughter, and the walls began to bleed dark, viscous stains spreading like veins. In their final moments, Emma turned to Jack. Tears streamed down his face as he raised the camera. "We have to capture it," he said, his voice breaking. The flash went off, and then there was nothing but silence. Months later, the cottage was listed for rent again. A realtor walked through the house, tidying up and setting fresh flowers on the table. In the attic, a new photograph appeared in the album. Two figures standing in the living room, their faces frozen in terror. The stranger's notes. The city hummed with life, honking horns, chattering crowds, and the distant drone of construction. For Mia, it was a symphony of new beginnings. Moving to this bustling metropolis was her way of starting over, leaving behind the small-town life and memories she wanted to bury. Her new apartment was perfect. A compact studio on the 14th floor, with just enough space for her books, her plants, and herself. The view from the window, a sprawling cityscape bathed in golden light, promised endless possibilities. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the walls, The silence inside her new home became oppressive. That first night, she barely noticed the faint scrawling sound, dismissing it as the creak of an unfamiliar building settling into itself. The first note appeared 2 weeks later. It was lying on her kitchen counter, written on plain, unlined paper. "I know you." Mia frowned, looking around. She lived alone, and the apartment had been locked. Shrugging it off, she assumed she must have absent-mindedly written it herself, a leftover scribble from her journaling habit. But when the second note appeared a day later, her nerves tightened. This one was taped to the inside of her front door. "Watch yourself." Her stomach churned. She double-checked the locks and scanned the apartment, opening every closet, checking under the bed. Nothing. Still, she brushed it off, telling herself that maybe she had overlooked the notes during unpacking. But as the days passed, the notes kept coming. One was folded and slipped under her pillow. "You're not alone." Another was taped to her bathroom mirror. "I've been here before." Mia's unease turned into dread. Someone was in her apartment. Desperation drove her to take action. She called the building manager, who assured her that the locks had been changed before she moved in. Still, she demanded they be replaced again. She installed a set of motion-activated cameras, hiding them in strategic corners of the apartment. For a week, the notes stopped. Mia began to relax, thinking she had finally regained control. But then, one morning, her blood ran cold when she opened her fridge to grab the milk. There, stuck to the carton, was another note. "You looked peaceful last night." Her heart raced. She immediately checked the camera footage. Every video played smoothly, no sign of anyone entering or leaving, no sign of anyone at all. It didn't make sense. She hadn't left the apartment unlocked, and the cameras should have caught something. But all she saw was herself, moving through her daily routine, oblivious. Mia started noticing other changes in her apartment. Her toothbrush felt wet even when she hadn't used it. Her books were slightly out of order, pages bent in ways she didn't remember. One night, she woke up gasping, convinced she'd heard the faintest creak of a floorboard. She stayed still, holding her breath, straining to hear. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Just as she was about to relax, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message, no sender. "Nice pajamas." She bolted upright, turning on every light in the apartment. But no one was there. The phone had no record of the message when she checked again, as if it had never existed. Sleep became impossible. She called the police, but without evidence of forced entry, they could do nothing. "Could it be someone you know?" they asked. "No," she said, but her voice wavered. She wasn't sure anymore. The breaking point came one quiet evening. She had spent the day barricaded in her apartment, too afraid to leave. By nightfall, she stood in the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. When she looked up, her blood turned to ice. A note was stuck to the mirror, written in jagged letters. "Turn around." She froze, gripping the edge of the sink. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She couldn't move, couldn't summon the courage to look behind her. Seconds felt like hours. Slowly, she forced herself to glance into the mirror again. The note was gone. Terrified, she called the police. When they arrived, they found no one, no signs of forced entry, and no note. One officer suggested she might be imagining things. Exhausted and desperate, Mia decided to leave the city. She packed a bag, ready to abandon the apartment and start fresh somewhere else. But that night, she received her last note. It was folded neatly on her nightstand when she woke up. "See you soon." Her scream echoed through the empty apartment. The police were called again. This time, they took the situation more seriously, performing a thorough search. Yet, like before, they found nothing. No fingerprints, no signs of tampering, nothing to suggest that anyone other than Mia had been there. Weeks later, a new tenant moved into the apartment. The landlord assured her the previous tenant had left suddenly, but the place was safe. On her first night, she found a folded note tucked into her pillowcase. "I know you." The breathing line. It started as a regular evening for Daniel, a quiet young man who worked a mundane office job by day and spent his nights immersed in video games and podcasts. Life wasn't particularly exciting, but it was comfortable. The first phone call came at 2:13 a.m. Daniel was jolted awake by the sharp trill of his phone vibrating on his nightstand. His first thought was that it must be an emergency. Who else would call at that hour? "Hello." His voice was thick with sleep. No response. Instead, there was breathing, deep, deliberate, almost guttural breaths, crackling through the line. "Who is this?" Daniel demanded, sitting up now, his pulse quickening. The breathing continued, steady and invasive. After a long pause, the call abruptly ended. Daniel brushed it off as a prank, annoyed but not overly concerned. Yet, as he lay back down, the sound of those breaths lingered in his mind. The next night, the phone rang again. This time, it was 2:07 a.m. The same number, the same breathing. Daniel felt a flicker of irritation but also unease. He hung up without saying a word and blocked the number. By the third night, when the call came from a new, unrecognizable number, he began to feel genuinely unnerved. The breathing was slower now, heavier, as if the caller wanted him to feel their presence. "Who the hell is this?" Daniel shouted into the phone. Click. The line went dead again. Sleep became elusive. Over the next week, the calls grew more frequent, always at odd hours, always with the same chilling sound. Daniel changed his number, convinced that would end it. But the very next night, the calls resumed, now from a restricted number. The breathing calls continued for days. Daniel tried everything, switching phones, unplugging landlines, even staying at a friend's apartment, but nothing worked. The calls followed him, persistent and unrelenting. Then, one night, the breathing changed. As Daniel pressed the phone to his ear, he noticed faint whispers beneath the rhythmic exhale. The voice was low, gravelly, and fragmented, as if whoever was on the other end was speaking from the depths of a cave. He recorded the call, letting the phone sit on the desk as the whispers continued. After hanging up, Daniel played the recording back, amplifying the audio on his computer. It was faint at first, just indecipherable murmurs. But as he slowed the playback, the words became chillingly clear. "I'm already inside." The blood drained from his face. He whipped around, scanning the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The apartment was silent except for the hum of his computer fan. He bolted to the front door, ensuring it was locked, then checked every window. Everything was secure. The next day, Daniel went to the police. They listened to his story with skepticism but agreed to file a report. "Probably just someone with too much time on their hands," the officer said. "Let us know if they escalate." But the calls were already escalating. That evening, Daniel felt an oppressive weight in his apartment. The air seemed colder, heavier, as though someone was watching him. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, made him jump. At 2 a.m., his phone vibrated. This time, the caller didn't wait for him to pick up. A voicemail appeared instead. Hands trembling, Daniel played the message. Breathing, and then, "Why are you running?" Daniel's chest tightened. He wasn't running, he was sitting frozen in his living room. His gaze darted to the dark hallway leading to his bedroom. Something felt wrong. Slowly, he stood and walked toward the room, each step hesitant. The door was ajar, just as he had left it. But when he peeked inside, the room felt off. The shadows seemed deeper, the corners darker. Then the lamp on his nightstand flickered on. Daniel staggered backward, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't touched the lamp. He hadn't even entered the room. Summoning his courage, he stepped inside, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. He scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The closet door was closed, the windows locked. He stood frozen for what felt like hours, staring at the flickering light. Finally, he rushed out of the apartment and called the police from the stairwell. When they arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone other than Daniel had been inside. One officer suggested he might be experiencing stress or paranoia. Another advised him to install a security system. They left him with a lingering sense of unease. That night, Daniel resolved not to sleep. He set up his phone to record the entire night, leaving it on the coffee table as he sat awake in the living room. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Nothing happened. At 2:37 a.m., his phone buzzed with a new voicemail. Heart pounding, Daniel listened to the recording. But this time, the voice spoke clearly, with no need to slow it down. "Look behind you." Daniel froze, his body rigid with terror. Slowly, he turned his head. The last thing he saw was a shadowy figure stepping out from the corner of the room, its face obscured but its presence unmistakable. Days later, Daniel's apartment was empty, his belongings untouched. Friends and family reported him missing, but no leads ever surfaced. The new tenant who moved in months later found a phone tucked into a drawer. Curious, she powered it on. A voicemail awaited her. The doll in the rain. The rain tapped steadily against the window panes as Marcus returned to his apartment after a long day. He found the package waiting on his doorstep. Small, unmarked, and damp from the storm. No return address, no labels, nothing to suggest who might have sent it. Puzzled but intrigued, he brought it inside, shaking off the water. Inside was a porcelain doll, delicate yet unervingly lifelike. Its glassy, staring eyes seemed to follow him, and its cracked smile appeared more sinister than inviting. Marcus frowned, a sense of unease creeping over him. Who would send him such a thing? Marcus set the doll on the kitchen counter, its presence gnawing at his nerves. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling through the city. By morning, the doll had shifted. He was sure he had left it facing the window, but now it sat turned toward the door. Its glassy eyes seemed to glare at him accusingly. "Enough of this," he muttered, grabbing the doll and tossing it into the trash bin outside. The rain soaked him as he made his way back inside, relieved to be rid of the unnerving object. But when he woke the next morning, it was there again. The doll sat on his coffee table, wet and smeared with mud, its cracked smile wider than before. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He checked the locks on his door and the windows. Everything was secure. He threw it away again, this time driving miles out of the city to dispose of it at a junkyard. Yet, the next morning it was back, now sitting on his bed. The doll began to change. Each time it returned, it seemed more damaged. Its porcelain face cracked further, exposing jagged lines that resembled fractures in a skull. Its glass eyes grew duller, more lifeless, and the painted smile began to peel, revealing an eerie emptiness beneath. The weight of dread pressed on Marcus. Every time he entered a room, he half expected the doll to be waiting for him. The rain outside became constant, the weather a ceaseless backdrop to his growing paranoia. One night, desperate, Marcus lit a fire in the fireplace. He hurled the doll into the flames, watching as its features blackened and blistered. For a moment, he felt a fleeting sense of victory. But the following morning, he awoke to find the doll, charred and broken, sitting at his dining table. Its cracks had widened, and something dark oozed from the fractures in its face. Marcus couldn't sleep anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the streetlights outside, made his heart race. He began hearing faint whispers, like someone speaking just out of earshot. One evening, as he sat in the dimly lit apartment, the lights flickered. A sharp cracking sound echoed from the living room. He turned the corner to see the doll lying on the floor, its head completely shattered. Relief washed over him. Finally, it was broken. Finally, it was over. But then came the footsteps. Soft, deliberate, and far too heavy to belong to a doll. They echoed from the hallway, each step louder than the last. Marcus backed away, his breath caught in his throat. The footsteps stopped just outside his bedroom door. The silence was suffocating. And then the door creaked open. The hallway was empty. No doll, no figure, just the lingering chill of something unseen. Marcus grabbed his phone, ready to call for help, but the screen flickered and died, leaving him isolated. In the days that followed, his apartment became a prison. Objects moved on their own. A glass shattered in the sink, a chair tipped over in the corner. The whispers grew louder, transforming into guttural growls. and the rain never stopped. Marcus found himself trapped in a cycle of sleepless nights and endless dread. He scoured the internet for answers, stumbling upon stories of cursed objects and haunted dolls. Each tale ended the same. Destruction of the object often released the spirit tied to it. One night, the air in the apartment grew heavy, pressing down on Marcus like an invisible weight. He sat in the living room, unable to move, as a figure began to take shape in the shadows. It was tall and gangly, its limbs too long for its frame, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. The fragments of the doll's face clung to its form, its shattered smile now a part of the creature's grotesque visage. The figure moved closer, its footsteps echoing hollowly on the wooden floor. Marcus tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing he saw before darkness consumed him was the figure leaning down, its face inches from his, its glassy, lifeless eyes locking onto his. Weeks later, a neighbor noticed that Marcus's apartment had been eerily quiet. No lights, no signs of life. The landlord, growing concerned, entered the unit. The apartment was empty, save for a single unmarked package left on the kitchen counter. Inside was the doll, its porcelain face now whole, its smile pristine. The rain outside continued to fall. As the rain fades into the whispers of dawn and the world begins to stir, remember this. The scariest stories are the ones that don't offer neat endings or clear resolutions. They linger, unfinished, like unanswered phone calls in the dead of night or shadowy figures at the edge of your vision. They creep into your thoughts when the house is silent, when the clock ticks louder than it should, and when the darkness feels just a little too deep. Tonight, these tales may have ended, but the questions they raise will follow you, like faint footsteps echoing in an empty hallway. Are you truly alone? Is that creak just the settling of wood, or something else? Let these stories remind you of one chilling truth. The unknown doesn't vanish with the sunrise. It waits, patient and unseen, closer than you think. So until next time, leave a light on, check the locks and sleep lightly, if you can.